Hello and welcome to Throwback Thursday. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about some horses that I've known over the years and what they've taught me. And I think it's really interesting when we look at just how much our horses teach us. It is quite incredible how much we learn from each interaction really with each horse and how different they are. And often, you learn something that'll be really useful for that horse, but perhaps not for another one. And so I just want to talk about three really different horses that have proved challenging for me training-wise in different ways and what I've done about it and how that's helped me get along. So the first one is a horse called Pocket Money, and he was a horse that I knew in Singapore. He wasn't my horse because at that stage you didn't really own the riding horses in Singapore, you just sort of leased them. So I didn't have a lot of control over what this horse, over his housing or whoever else rode him or anything else. So, but I rode him every day and I did a lot of dressage competitions on him as well. I took him in the Rolex International in dressage. And yeah, he was a great horse for me over a couple of years. So that was good. But he began life as a racehorse, and he did race like a lot of those horses in places like Singapore, and a lot of them are off the track horses. And his first after racing job was a show jumper. And he'd been sort of bullied into that, much like he was during his racing career, I expect. And he really hated it. I mean, by the time they got him out of the show jumping arena and put him into dressage, he only needed to see a show jump and he would actually throw himself on the ground. He was so scared of it. So that was really upsetting, to know that. So I spent the first year just doing dressage with him and quite a lot of groundwork and things, which was great. And then I started experimenting a little bit with just popping him over the odd jump. And he could really jump. I see why they really liked him for that. But he could jump 1.10 m. I remember doing that in a lesson, 1.10 m from a jog, the sort of jog that your dressage instructor would say, that's not a trot, get that horse to trot, rah, rah, rah. That sort of a jog. This little sort of quarter horse type jog, he'd just bounce over 1.10 m, no problem at all. So he was great. But he really didn't like the whole sort of environment. So what I did with him is I did jump him a little bit, but mostly only in sort of equitation classes. So we used to go to Malaysia to compete, and I would do a dressage classes first, and then I'd warm him up in the dressage arena, just do dressage movements, and then I'd just take him into the jumping equitation classes, because the dressage, what that was doing for us was, and I didn't realize it at the time, this was 20 years ago, what it was doing was it was building that bubble for me, and it was making him feel really safe and secure because he understood that. He really did. He really understood that. He'd learned that dressage really well. He knew the movements. He knew what the cues meant, and he was never surprised. And so we could warm up like that, and then I could take him with his bubble into the jumping arena, and we could jump a course where they were only judging equitation, so they weren't huge jumps, 75, 80 centimeters, something like that. And he could do that really happily, really beautifully. So that was a really good lesson for me very early on. As I say, that was 20 years ago, and I didn't realize that was what I was doing. I didn't realize that I was actually building that bubble of communication. But that kept him safe, because what it meant was his environment was predictable. And I think that's the really important thing, and that's why I feel it's so important that we have this bubble of communication, is because horses love patterns. They're great pattern learners, and you know it yourself. If you usually feed at 5 o'clock and you don't feed till 6 o'clock, they're all out in the paddock screaming at you because you're late. They like predictability. They like patterns. That's what they understand, and that's the way they function really well, and it really helps them to relax. And I think the jumping arena had been very unpredictable for this horse. I think that was his big problem. The next horse was born in Argentina and broken in Argentina. It's a little horse called Chiquita, who's also I found in Singapore. But I then took her to Colorado, and then after Colorado, I took her to the UK with me. And again, she was a polo pony, so I used to play polo on her, and I would take her for rides in the jungle and things in Singapore, the trail rides. But again, she didn't belong to me then. I bought her when I left Singapore. So again, I didn't have much control over what she was, how she was housed or anything like that. I mean, the housing in Singapore is, not ideal for horses. It's a long way from ideal. Actually, they have no turnout. They're in stables 24/7. They're nice big stables, but they're stables. So the horses are taken out twice a day and exercise, but it's not a great life at all. And the first time she'd pretty much been off that place was when she flew out to come to me in Colorado. So she was broken in Argentina, so she was just scared of everything. I mean, that was just, it was really upsetting actually, because she was such a nervous horse. And with her, it was the same thing. By the time I got her to John and Josh Lyons in Colorado, I actually, the first morning, which was really embarrassing, the first morning of my certification program, which was 7 months long in Colorado, and you bring 2 horses, and I bought her and a mare from Perth, actually, in Australia. So on the first morning, we had all this talk about, what the course was entailing and all the introduction you do on the first day, and that was great. And then in the afternoon, Josh says, okay, now we'll go down to the yards and we'll get the horses out and you can have a ride and we'll assess you, whatever it was. Anyway, so I got down there, and you were supposed to take one horse that was broken in and one that wasn't. So Chiquita was my broken in horse, and I get down there and she's standing in a 12 by 12 yard, a really little yard, and I go in and she just turns her back on me. I actually couldn't catch her, so I had to get Josh, excuse me, I can't catch my horse. And she'd been taught this thing by the Sais, the groom, they call it, in Singapore. And what you had to do is you had to get a little towel and you had to flick that over her wither. And as soon as that was on her wither, she knew to stand still. And you could do anything then, she'd stand still. I didn't know that. Like, nobody had told me that, right? She just arrived off the plane. So I'm like, I have no idea how to catch this horse. And she's pretty fast, turning her rear to me. So anyway, Josh managed to do it, got her to turn around and face him, and we went from there. But that was quite an eye-opening thing. Now, over the course of those 7 months, she became the most incredible horse. She never lost her fear of new people. And I think if you have any idea about how they do break horses in, especially 30 years ago in Argentina, I'm not sure if they're still doing it, but they basically actually break them. They run them until they're so exhausted, and then they get a fresh horse and they run it longer, and then they blindfold them and they beat them and they do. I mean, it's just shocking. And I'm sure she went through all of that. And she also arrived in Singapore as a 2-year-old already playing polo. So you can imagine the sort of mindset the poor creature left with. But by the end of that course, she was quite incredible. I mean, bridleless, no problem at all. You could do pretty much anything on her. And she was just great. But still, that was our bubble. And this is the thing about these bubbles, is you've got to build your own, because I couldn't hand that horse to anybody and then take the bubble with them. It was my bubble and Chiquita's bubble. And so when my son started riding her, we had to build that up again. He needed his own bubble. She'd do anything for me, but as soon as somebody else tries to ride, she's like, oh, that's really different. But when they did build up this really strong bubble, because my son took her to Pony Club for quite a few years when we moved back to Australia. And she was amazing. They just went from strength to strength, but just had such a good time. I remember one time I was watching them at Pony Club, and we'd gone to an event. It was a one-day event where they do the dressage and the show jumping and the cross country. And there were tons of people. Like, it was this huge sort of zone Pony Club event. So kids everywhere and horses and everything. And they had this walkway where the kids had to ride their horses around to get to the start of the cross country. And I could see my son on this horse, and the horse was getting really nervous because it had to come into this big sort of crowd, and it was something she hadn't experienced before. And so we were talking the other day about horses that they develop a shopping list sort of to their repertoire of possible responses. So, you give them a cue, and if it's a new cue, they might decide to try something that worked before. So, they might move in one direction when you're actually wanting another one, and you just need to keep cueing until they work their way down that shopping list and they find the right answer. So one of the things on her shopping list was piaffe, because I'd taught her to piaffe because she's really, really trainable. And so I'm watching Ollie there, and he's trying to get from A to B on this little pony, and she's piaffing her heart out because she thinks maybe that will work, maybe that will get all this pressure and all these people away from me. It was absolutely gorgeous. But they had this great bubble, so Ollie could just sort of say to her, no, that's not what I want, calm down, we'll just walk, we'll just go forward. And eventually she did, but very sweet. So a really nice sort of bubble building thing. The last horse I want to talk about is one that I'm starting now, and this is a more interesting one because there's no history on this one. He's a Frisian, and he's definitely taken, I'd say probably about it actually, of the hundreds and hundreds of horses that I've broken in over the last 20 years. This has definitely been the slowest process I've ever known, by about 10 times slower than anything else. Beautiful horse, but I think it's just his nature. He's just, when you see him standing in the paddock, he goes from 16-1 to 17-3, like in an instant. As soon as anything moves, he's terribly vigilant. And I think that is just his nature. So with what I'm doing about that is everything that I do has to be so solid. I have heard this with Frisians. I haven't had a lot to do with them, but I have heard that they might not be the sharpest, but once they get it, they really get it. And I have the feeling he might be like that as well, because once he gets something, he really gets it. Getting there takes a long time. With him, to build that bubble, I need to really, really work hard on making sure that I'm not skipping any steps, even when the steps take 10 times as long as I feel they should. What does that mean? I mean, why should they? Why should they? He's an individual, and this is the way he is. So I just need to adapt my training to that. And he's really interesting. I mean, he has taught me so much, so many sort of other ways of doing things. And I've only really been working with him, I suppose, for a few months now. And really, if it was any other horse, he'd have flying changes by now, but he's got like 3 steps under saddle so far. So not great. But for him, good. And he's absolutely divine. And you can see his little face when he's really proud of himself. But you can also feel it when he's unsure about something. He's very black and white, which is lovely, because you know exactly where he is every minute. You know exactly when you've gone too far and when you could perhaps do a little bit more than what you're asking. So it's very, very interesting. And I'm actually making quite a lot of video with this horse, so I will be putting that up on the training site for those of you that are interested, or those of you that have horses that are quite anxious as well, especially horses that have had bad histories, when you need to go back and redo things. And this horse hasn't had a bad history, but it does feel a bit like that. And I'm certainly breaking it down a lot more than I normally would. And, when I'm like, I break everything down as much as I possibly can. So it should make some, quite useful video for you as well. Anyway, that's it for me today. I will see you on Monday with Monday Motivation, and I look forward to that. Have a great weekend. Bye.